I was told the family business would never be mine. Not because I wasn't capable, not because I hadn't earned it, but because I was a daughter, not a son. That sentence has lived inside me like a scar. Even now, at 30 years old, running my own empire, I can still hear my father's voice cutting the air that night like a blade. But let me back up. My name is Emily Carter. And this is the story of how betrayal at my own family's dining table pushed me out, forced me to start from nothing, and eventually led me to build something greater than they could have ever imagined. If you're into the real story and all the messy family power plays they don't teach you in business school, go ahead. And if you're sticking around to see how this forgotten daughter turned the tables on her own family, you should definitely be subscribed, because trust me, it gets messy. I was 22 years old when it happened, fresh out of college, top of my class in business. Honors, awards, professors telling me I was born to lead. I'd worked harder than anyone I knew. Late nights running case studies, weekends buried in financial reports. I didn't just want to run Carter Enterprises, my family's company. I lived for it. I'd been preparing for that role since I was a kid. I was the one who hung around Dad's office after school, watching how deals were made, memorizing the language of contracts before I even had a driver's license. By the time I hit high school, I was helping Mom balance the books for one of our smaller subsidiaries. When other kids were at prom, I was competing in national business competitions and winning. I thought it was obvious. I thought my future was set in stone. The funny thing about stone, though, it can shatter in an instant. My family. How do I even describe them? On the surface, we looked picture perfect. My father, Richard Carter, was the definition of traditional authority. Stern, strict, silver hair combed back, the kind of man whose presence filled a room before he even spoke. He ran Carter Enterprises like it was his kingdom, and we were all just subjects under his rule. My mother, Margaret, was polished and polite, always playing hostess at events, always making sure we looked like the perfect family in front of investors. But when it came to me, she had a way of brushing off my ambitions as if they were a phase. Don't overwork yourself, Emily. You'll make a wonderful support someday. Support, not leader. Never leader. And then there was David, my older brother by 3 years. Charming, smug, entitled. The golden child. He had the kind of lazy charisma that fooled people into thinking he was competent, but I knew better. I'd seen his grades. I'd watched him flounder his way through internships Dad had handed him on a silver platter. Still, David could do no wrong. When I won awards, the praise was lukewarm. When David passed a single class he had nearly failed, it was champagne at dinner. Favoritism wasn't just in the air of our house, it was baked into the walls. It was the night of my graduation dinner. We gathered in the dining room of our home. The long mahogany table, polished so bright you could see your reflection in it. Family portraits lined the walls. My father shaking hands with mayors, my mother at charity events, David in his Letterman jacket. I was there too, in a few frames, but always in the background. I remember clutching my graduation honors in my hand, my heart pounding. I was ready to present my vision, the plans I had been crafting for years to take Carter Enterprises into the future. Renewable energy investments, digital expansions, strategies to modernize our operations. I thought they would be proud, but pride was not what I found at that table. My father cleared his throat, his voice carrying the same finality as a gavel. Emily, we've made a decision about the future of Carter Enterprises. My chest swelled with anticipation. David will be taking over. Just like that. No discussion, no consideration. I froze, staring at him, certain I had misheard. What? My mother placed her hand over mine as if softening the blow. Her voice was sugar, but her words were poison. You'll always have a place here, Emily, but your brother needs this more. It's only right. David leaned back in his chair, smirking without saying a word. He didn't need to. His smug little smile said it all. I win. My mouth went dry. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, but all I managed was a trembling whisper. I worked for this. I earned this. My father shook his head. This company was always meant for the eldest son. That's tradition. You can support David, of course. You'll be a valuable asset to him. Support. Asset. Not leader. In that moment, everything I had built, everything I had fought for, collapsed in front of me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my room, graduation certificate still in my hand, business plans scattered around me like ashes. I cried until my chest hurt, until I couldn't breathe. Rage burned in me, hot and wild, but it couldn't hide the deeper wound, the humiliation of being erased in my own family. It wasn't just about the company. It was about identity. My parents hadn't just denied me a role, they had denied who I was. They told me my dreams were worthless because they didn't fit the mold they wanted. And sitting there, staring at the pile of papers I had poured my soul into, I realized I could stay and play the part of the obedient daughter, or I could walk away. That was the night something inside me broke, but something else ignited. If they wouldn't give me the company, I would build one of my own, bigger, stronger, smarter. I would rise from the ashes they left me in, and one day they would regret ever doubting me. That was the promise I made to myself, and I never break a promise. The night I walked out of my parents' house, I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I had turned around, if I had seen the lights glowing through the dining room window, I might have collapsed right there on the driveway. Instead, I gripped the handle of my old, secondhand suitcase and kept walking. It was stuffed with clothes, a few notebooks filled with my business plans, and the weight of betrayal pressing heavier than anything inside. My new life began in a tiny one-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of mildew. The carpet was stained, the windows drafty, and the furniture was whatever I could scavenge from thrift stores and Craigslist. My desk was a wobbly card table stacked with notebooks, bills, and the same business plans I had shown my parents. Only now, they felt less like blueprints and more like broken promises. At night, I lay on a sagging mattress on the floor, staring at the cracked ceiling, grief sitting like a stone in my chest. Humiliation burned just beneath it. They had erased me, my own parents. But beneath the humiliation, there was a flicker of something else, something stubborn, defiant. They might not believe in me, but I refused to let them define me. The first thing I did was start applying for loans and pitching my ideas to anyone who would listen. Bankers, small-time investors, angel funds. I showed them my business plans with shaking hands and fire in my voice. And almost every time, I got the same response. Too young, too ambitious, you'll never compete with Carter Enterprises. Some were polite, leaning back in the leather chairs, offering me tight, condescending smiles before sliding my paperwork back across the desk. Others were blunt, telling me flat out that I should get a job supporting someone else until I had more experience. Every slammed door left me seething. Every rejection letter felt like a confirmation of my parents' cruel prophecy. But then I'd look at myself in the mirror, tired, yes, beaten down, yes, and whisper, not yet, not done. Because if there was one thing I knew how to do, it was keep going. Of course, determination didn't pay the bills. Rent didn't care about my dreams. Neither did groceries. So I worked. I worked until my body screamed at me. I waitressed at a greasy diner, the kind that left your clothes smelling like fried onions no matter how many times you washed them. I stood for 10 hours at a stretch, smiling at customers who snapped their fingers at me like I was furniture. My feet blistered, my back ached, but I kept going. On weekends, I tutored college kids in economics. During evenings, I picked up freelance projects, writing business proposals for small startups, crunching numbers for people who didn't even bother to remember my name. By the time I stumbled home at night, my body was ready to collapse. But instead of crawling into bed, I'd sit down at my wobbly little desk, spread out my notebooks, and keep working on my own company. Ramen noodles for dinner, cold coffee at midnight. Sometimes I'd wake up with my face pressed against spreadsheets, the lamp still glowing. Every dollar I saved felt like a Brit for the empire I swore I'd build. It took months. Rejections piled higher than the bills. But one day, finally, someone said yes. It was a small client, a local business that needed help restructuring their operations. Nothing glamorous, nothing headline-worthy, but it was mine, my first contract. I worked on that project like my life depended on it, because it did. I poured every ounce of strategy, every trick I'd learned, every instinct I had into making it a success. And when it worked, when the client told me I had saved their company thousands of dollars and wanted to recommend me to others, I stayed up all night buzzing with adrenaline. That first spark lit something inside me. I remember calling Sarah, my best friend from college. She came over with a cheap bottle of wine, and we sat on my sagging couch, toasting with chipped mugs because we didn't own proper glasses. She laughed. "Look at you, Em. I told you, you're not as alone as you think." For the first time in months, I believed her. Sarah became my anchor. She was the one who reminded me to eat, who shoved coffee into my hand when I was too tired to stand, who reminded me to celebrate even the smallest wins. Around this time, I also met someone who would become my mentor. His name was Robert Hayes, a retired executive who had built and sold 3 companies before I was even out of high school. He'd sat in on one of my pitch meetings where I'd been rejected, and afterward he pulled me aside. "You've got fire," he said, "but fire alone won't keep a company alive. Success isn't built in comfort, it's built in exhaustion and sacrifice. Learn to endure, and you'll make it." His words stuck with me. And then there was Mia, a fellow Brad I'd known from college. She believed in my vision when almost no one else did. She joined me early on, not for the paycheck, God knows there barely was one, but because she believed in what we were building. Looking back now, that was the moment my chosen family began to form. It didn't happen overnight, but piece by piece, things started to shift. 1 client turned into 2, 2 into 5. Word spread. I hired Mia full-time, then a 2nd employee, then a 3rd. We scraped together enough money to rent a small office, barely bigger than a closet, but it was ours. And as the company grew, so did I. The ramen and second-hand clothes gave way to sharper business attire. I stopped looking like a girl barely holding it together and started looking like a woman who knew she was building something real. Every rejection, every night of exhaustion, every slammed door became part of the fuel I carried with me. The pain of betrayal had become my greatest weapon. By my late 20s, my company was gaining traction. We were no longer scraping by. We were competing. I was being invited to conferences, speaking on panels, shaking hands with people who once wouldn't even return my calls. For the first time in my life, I was standing tall on my own terms. But here's the truth I didn't admit to anyone at the time. No matter how high I climbed, the echo of that night at my parents' table was always there. Their voices lived in the back of my mind, whispering that I would never be enough. And I thought I had left the Carters behind, but I didn't realize the higher I climbed, the closer I was getting to the day I would stand across from them again. When I was 22, I walked away from my family with nothing but a suitcase and a dream they laughed at. At 30, I walked into my own headquarters, a glass tower piercing the sky, with a nameplate on the door that read, "Emily Carter, CEO." Sometimes I still catch myself pausing at the window of my office, staring out at the skyline. The sun glints off steel and glass, the city humming below me, and I remember the girl who ate ramen on a wobbly card table. She wouldn't recognize this woman. Sharp blazer, steady voice, people hanging on every word in the boardroom. This wasn't Carter money. This wasn't Carter favoritism. Every inch of polished marble, every employee who nodded respectfully when I passed, all of it was mine and no one else's. And I'll admit it, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the same last name my parents had tried to erase was now whispered in business circles, attached to me and me alone. It started as a whisper, a slip of gossip from an old contact, a murmur at a gala. "Have you heard? Carter Enterprises isn't what it used to be." At first, I brushed it off. My parents' empire had been untouchable for decades, built on old money, old rules. I told myself I didn't care. But then the stories piled up, suppliers pulling out, deals collapsing. David, the golden boy, the chosen heir, fumbling in public interviews. One morning, I opened the financial pages and saw it in black and white. Carter Enterprises stock plummets. Investors question leadership. I laughed, out loud, alone in my office. The irony was too sharp, too sweet.
The empire I had been told I wasn't worthy of was crumbling under the weight of the son they thought was born to lead. And here's the truth. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself their ruin was none of my business. But the smirk tugging at my lips said otherwise. I didn't have to destroy them, I told myself one late night, staring at the glow of my laptop screen. They're destroying themselves. All I have to do is wait. And wait I did. While Carter Enterprises bled value, I positioned myself like a chess player, moving pieces into place. Quiet acquisitions, strategic partnerships, silent purchases of stock as prices fell lower and lower.
Piece by piece, I built my strategy. The very patience they had mistaken for weakness years ago was now my greatest weapon. And when the final opportunity came, the chance to buy a controlling stake through a deal their board was too desperate to refuse, I didn't hesitate. The pen slid across the dotted line, and just like that, the empire that had been stolen from me was mine again. The boardroom was just as I remembered it. Polished oak table, family portraits on the wall, a place that once smelled like power and permanence, except this time the air was thick with unease. My father sat stiffly, jaw clenched, eyes shadowed with worry. My mother's hands folded tightly in her lap, her pearls glinting under the overhead lights. And David, oh David, his once arrogant posture sagged, his eyes darting nervously between papers and faces, searching for answers he didn't have. Then came the sound of my heels clicking against the floor, sharp, steady, deliberate. Every head turned as I entered. Tailored suit, papers in hand, confidence in every step. I sat down at the head of the table, their table, my table. My father was the first to speak, his voice brittle. "Emily, what is this?" I slid the documents across the table. "It's simple," I said calmly. "Carter Enterprises is under new ownership, effective immediately." My mother blinked, confused. New ownership? But who? I leaned back, let the silence stretch, and then smiled. Me. The word hung in the air like a bomb. Their faces drained of color. David's mouth opened, but no sound came out. My father looked as if he'd swallowed glass. I savored it, not out of cruelty, but out of justice. After all these years, the scales had finally tipped. "This is still our company," my father snapped, his voice rising, brittle with desperation. "No," I said, my voice steady, cold. "It was. Now it's mine." My mother shook her head. "Emily, you can't do this. We built this company." "You built it, yes," I cut in sharply, "but you also destroyed it. And when you chose David over me, you made it clear my place wasn't here. So I built my own, stronger, smarter, and now I own both." David finally found his voice. "It wasn't my fault. The economy tanked, deals fell through." "Stop," I said, and the word cracked like a whip. "The economy didn't fail this company. You did. And our parents let you because they believed your last name was enough to carry you. It wasn't." My voice shook, not with weakness, but with the fury of years carried to this moment. "Do you remember the night you told me I'd never run this company, that I should support him instead? Do you remember, David, smirking at the table while they erased me?" Silence. None of them looked me in the eye. And in that silence, I felt the storm of every sleepless night, every rejection, every insult I had swallowed to get here. There's an irony to revenge they never tell you about. It doesn't roar, it doesn't explode. It sits quietly, like a crown on your head, while the people who once towered over you are forced to look up. My father, once the voice of authority, sat silent, lips pressed thin. My mother, always so polished, stared at her folded hands, unable to meet my gaze. And David, the golden child, the chosen heir, looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. "They once told me I wasn't enough," I said softly, more to myself than to them. "And now, their future depends on me." That day, I walked out of the Carter Enterprises boardroom not just as the CEO of their empire, but as the woman who had reclaimed every piece of herself they had tried to erase. But here's the thing, revenge is intoxicating. It's sweet, yes, but it leaves an aftertaste. Because now that I had it all, the question burned hotter than ever. Would I finish what I started? Cut them out? Fire them? Erase them the way they once erased me? Or would I keep them, not as family, but as employees under my authority, forced to answer to the daughter they once discarded? The choice was mine. For the first time in my life, completely mine. I turned to the audience, to you, and whispered the truth. They pushed me out of the empire. I built my own. And now the empire was mine again. The only question left was, what would I do with them? Silence. That was the sound that followed my announcement. Not applause, not outrage, just silence. My father's jaw locked so tight I could almost hear his teeth grinding. My mother's hands trembled, her pearls clicking faintly against one another as if even they couldn't keep still. And David, poor David, looked like a boy again, caught cheating on an exam, fumbling for excuses that wouldn't come. The executives glanced between us, eyes flickering with unease, the weight of history pressing down on all of them. And me? I sat at the head of the table, spine straight, pulse steady, savoring every second. I had dreamed of this moment for years, replayed it in my mind during sleepless nights in that cramped little apartment, the day they would have to look at me, acknowledge me, answer to me. But here's the truth I didn't expect. Staring at their broken faces, I felt something I hadn't prepared for, a hollowness. I thought victory would taste like champagne, sharp and sleet. Instead, it tasted like silence. And I wondered, was this really what winning looked like? Later that evening, I asked them to meet me privately. No executives, no board members, just the four of us. Family, if we could still be called that. The setting was my CEO office, sleek and modern, the skyline glittering behind me. I sat behind my desk, and for the first time in my life, they sat across from me like subordinates. David was the first to speak, his voice cracked and small. "Emily, I didn't want this, not like this. I thought I could do it, but I wasn't ready. They pushed me into it." I leaned forward. "They didn't just push you into it, David. They pushed me out of it." My mother winced. "We thought we were doing what was best for the family." I laughed, sharp, bitter. Best for the family, or best for the son you always believed in over the daughter you never did? My father's voice boomed, though it lacked its old authority. "Tradition matters, Emily. A son carries the name forward. That's the way it's always been." I held his gaze. "And look where that got you. Look where that got this company." The words hung heavy in the room. For a moment, I almost wished one of them would say it. "We were wrong. We're proud of you." But the silence that followed told me all I needed to know. I turned inward then, confiding silently to the version of myself that had once cried into ramen cups and scribbled business plans on napkins. A part of me wanted revenge, to slam my fist down, humiliate them the way they humiliated me. To watch them walk out of this building stripped of the power they once lorded over me. But another part of me, the part that had clawed her way up from nothing, whispered a different truth. "You've already won." Revenge wasn't proof of my strength. I was proof of my strength. "Once you stripped me of my place in this company," I said finally, my voice calm, steady. "You told me I didn't belong, but I built something greater. And now I choose what kind of leader I'll be, not you." I would not repeat their cycle of favoritism and cruelty. I would not let the past dictate the way I ruled the future. So here's what I decided. I didn't fire them, not because they didn't deserve it, they did, but because I realized I didn't need to. Instead, I kept them, not as leaders, not as visionaries, not even as equals, but as employees. My father, the once untouchable patriarch, would answer to quarterly reports like any other manager. My mother, who once told me to support David, would sit in a role she could not twist with favoritism. And David, well, David would finally know what it meant to work under me. It wasn't mercy, it was justice, poetic, precise, undeniable justice. They once told me I didn't belong in this company. Now, every paycheck, Every meeting, every signed memo would remind them that the company belonged to me. I'll be honest with you, a part of me still longed to hear those words. "We're proud of you, Emily. We were wrong." But the truth is, I don't need them anymore. That night they cut me out, I thought my worth depended on their approval. I thought their recognition was the key to my future. But I was wrong. They built their empire on favoritism. I built mine on grit. And grit doesn't crumble. I don't need their validation to prove who I am. My success is my proof. My survival is my proof. The skyline outside my window is my proof. I realized something else too. They can't ever take this away from me again, because it was never theirs to give. It was always mine to claim. That night, I left the office later than usual. The building was quiet, the halls echoing with my footsteps. I stepped outside and stood on the front steps of Carter Enterprises, my company now, the cool night air brushing against my skin. The city stretched out before me, alive with lights, humming with possibility. I thought about the girl I once was, clutching her degree with trembling hands. I thought about the nights of hunger, of exhaustion, of rejection. And I thought about this moment, standing where I never thought I'd stand, not as their daughter, but as myself. They once pushed me out, certain I would fail, I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. I built something greater, returned, and took it all back, not to destroy them, but to prove that I was always more than they ever believed. And now, I know, I was never the forgotten one. I was always the one who rose. And for the first time in years, I felt it. Peace.